The frost was still on the fence wire when I filled that feed bucket before sunrise, same as most mornings that year. An old blue enamel one, dented on one side, that had sat by the kitchen door longer than I'd been alive, and it smelled like sour milk and cornmeal, even empty. The hens were already fussing behind the wire, that low, complaining sound they make before light really breaks, like they know something's owed to them. $600. Sit with that number for a second, because I'm not going to explain it yet. Somewhere tonight, somebody is standing in a feed aisle in Worcester or Millersburg, or wherever you happen to be, doing the math in their head and hoping it comes out smaller than it does. Stay with me to the end, because I'm going to show you a fermentation ratio my grandmother wrote in pencil in the back of a family Bible. One I have never once seen printed in any book, magazine, or corner of the internet. And before any of that, tell me something. When was the last time you actually added up what you spend to keep something alive that used to just take care of itself? We didn't call it a method. It was just how it was done. My mother kept 3 buckets by that kitchen door. One for the hogs, one for the garden, and the blue one for the hens. And nobody in that house ever measured a thing with a scale, because a scale was something English people used when they didn't trust their own hands. I can still hear the scrape of that spoon against enamel, the particular sound of a plate being emptied into a bucket instead of a trash can. I haven't bought a full bag of feed at retail price since I left that kitchen, and I don't plan to start now. I'll say something that might get an argument going in the comments, and I mean it honestly. I think most backyard flocks in this country are eating like it's still 1950. Except now, somebody is turning a profit on every single ounce of it. Tell me in the comments what you're paying right now. The real number, not the one you tell your spouse. I read every one of them. And more of what you write lines up with something I haven't gotten to yet than you'd guess. Here's the part nobody likes to say out loud. A 40-pound bag of layer feed today costs more than double what it did back in 2006. And it isn't because the chickens got hungrier. Corn and soybean futures went up, sure, but the bag price went up faster than the ingredients did, because a company can raise a number by a few cents at a time, and nobody notices until the year is over and you've handed them $400 or $500 for something a hen never asked you to buy in the first place. I can still hear the crinkle of a feed sack in that memory, that stiff paper sound, and somewhere behind it, the quieter sound of a company deciding how much more it could ask for this year without anyone complaining loud enough to matter. Do you actually know what's listed on the back of the bag you buy, past the marketing on the front? There's no money in telling you a flock can feed itself on what your own kitchen already throws away, so nobody does. I'll tell you exactly what changed my mind about that. But first, I have to tell you where I first saw it done, because that part still gets me, if I let it. I drove 60-some miles back to Holmes County a few years after I left to sit in my aunt's kitchen and ask her a question I'd been turning over for months. Whether the thing I remembered was real, or whether I'd built it up in my head the way you do with everything from a place you can't go back to. Have you ever gone back somewhere just to prove a memory wasn't lying to you? She pulled out a German Bible, spine cracked and taped with what looked like feed sack cloth, and it smelled like a cellar when she opened it. Old paper and something faintly like cedar, the smell of a thing kept somewhere cool and mostly closed. In the back cover, in pencil so faint I had to hold it toward the window, was my grandmother Fanny's handwriting. A ratio, a number of days, and one word I won't try to translate right, so I'll just show you what it meant when I tried it myself. For a second, standing there, I honestly didn't believe it. 13 words in pencil, feeding a flock through a Holmes County winter without a single trip to town. That didn't sound like the whole thing. But I stood in that kitchen and counted the winters my aunt said she'd used it, and I stopped counting after 12, because by then, I believed her completely. What she wrote in pencil is almost exactly what I'm about to walk you through. Almost, but not quite. And that difference matters more than you'd think. There was a word for it, but I won't translate it right, so I'll just show you instead. In the plain language a chemist would use today, what we did is called lactic acid fermentation. But thirsty is the right word. You're not cooking the grain, you're letting it drink. Take your regular layer ration, whatever grain mix you already feed, and cover it by about an inch of water in a food-safe bucket, not metal, because metal fights the acid that's about to build. 2 days at room temperature is usually enough in warm weather, 3 in cold, until it smells sharp and a little sour, like bread dough left too long. That smell is the entire test. If it smells rotten instead of sour, you start over. And you will get it wrong at least once. You can feel the ferment working too, if you're patient enough to check. Press your palm flat against the side of the bucket on the second day, and there's a faint warmth to it, almost nothing, like something breathing low under the lid. In real cold, the whole process slows down close to a crawl, and that trips people up the first winter every time. Move the bucket somewhere it can hold a steadier temperature. A mudroom, a barn corner near the animals, anywhere above freezing. And give it the extra day it's asking for, instead of rushing it. A ferment that's only half done isn't dangerous. It just hasn't earned its keep yet. And a hen will tell you the difference by how fast she cleans the bowl. My mother used to say a ferment bucket has a temper, and you learn to read it the way you'd read a person who's had a hard morning. I remember one January when the bucket sat too close to the stove and went from sour to something closer to spoiled in a single afternoon, and my mother poured the whole thing into the hog pen without a word of complaint. Because complaining about a mistake you could have prevented wasn't something she had much patience for. Alongside the ferment, we fed whatever the kitchen produced that day. Potato peels, the tough outer leaves of cabbage, sour milk past drinking, the ends of things nobody at the table wanted. A hen forages far more than most owners give her credit for. Let loose in even a modest yard for 3 or 4 hours, she'll find a real share of her own protein in bugs and greens before you've filled a single bowl for her. Between the ferment, the scraps, and what the yard gave up on its own, the bag we bought in town went from something we refilled every week to something that sat in the barn for the better part of a month. You could hear the difference in the yard too, that steady scratching and low clucking of hens actually working for something, instead of standing at a feeder, waiting for it to be refilled. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. I did all of the following myself before I understood what was wrong. I fed scraps that were too salty, anything cured or heavily seasoned, and wondered why a couple of hens went off their feed for 2 days straight. I let a ferment bucket sit for a full week once, out of laziness, and it turned to something closer to vinegar than food, which the flock wisely refused. I fed only kitchen scraps for a stretch, thinking I was saving even more, and watched egg production drop within about 10 days because there wasn't enough protein in what I was giving them. And I mixed a batch too wet, more soup than mash, and half of it soaked into the ground before a single hen got a proper meal out of it. I'll tell you the part I don't usually say out loud. The year my father's health started failing, and money in that house got tighter than anyone would admit at the table. That blue dented bucket was the difference between buying feed and not buying it some weeks. And I remember standing at the counter, 16 years old, scraping a plate into it, and feeling something close to shame, like I was doing something that meant we couldn't afford better. It took me leaving, and years of paying full price for everything myself, to understand that bucket wasn't a sign of what we lacked. It was the smartest thing in that kitchen. I still wonder how many of you have a version of that bucket somewhere, and never once thought of it as anything but a chore. But there's a point where even this stops being as simple as I'm making it sound. If you're the kind of person who'd rather understand a system than just follow steps, you already know what to do here. And if you're new, come back, because there's a part of this story about what happened after I left that I haven't told anywhere else yet. Here's something unrelated, and I promise I'll come back to the point. When I first moved off the farm into an apartment with a refrigerator I didn't grow up trusting, I threw away real food for the first time in my life. A bag of spinach, forgotten, gone soft. And I stood in that kitchen and felt an almost physical reaction to it, like I'd broken a rule nobody had to say out loud. Would you have felt anything at all? Or would it have just been Tuesday? It took me a full year to stop apologizing to an empty room every time it happened. But it taught me something I still use every day now, and it's the reason the next part matters more than the method itself. This is where it stopped being simple. This method is for people with a small flock. 6 hens, a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, with a yard or a run they can rotate, and a kitchen that already produces real scraps every day. It is not for someone raising broilers for fast meat production, where the math and the protein needs are entirely different. And it is not a way to cut corners on clean water, shelter, or basic care. Anyone who tells you a fermented bucket replaces good husbandry is selling you something, and I promise you, it isn't advice. It also isn't a fix for a flock that's already sick, or a coop that's already damp and cold and smelling of something worse than sour grain. That smell alone should tell you the problem is bigger than feed. How many of the shortcuts you've been sold this year were actually shortcuts? And how many was something else wearing that name? What it will do, if you let it, is put a bag of feed back in the barn for far longer than you've budgeted for in years. And that's the whole reason I started keeping count in the first place. There is good money in selling a woman a thing she must keep buying every single week for the rest of her life. There is no money at all in teaching her how to make one bag last a month instead of a week. How many bills like that are you still paying without noticing? The ones that became so ordinary, you stopped counting them as bills at all. That's the whole business, once you strip the marketing off it. Same script, different product. Same bill every week, whether you asked for it or not. So here's what I want you to actually do about it. This weekend, before you buy your next bag, go stand at your kitchen counter and count what you'd normally scrape into the trash in a single day. Not what you think it is, what it actually is. Come back and tell me the honest number, in cups or pounds, whatever measure you've got. And type the word thirsty in the comments if you've ever fed an animal something you weren't sure was going to work. And it did. Because I've got one more thing to close out before we're done here. The part I promised you at the very start. My grandmother Fanny's pencil ratio, the one my aunt still keeps in the back of that Bible, comes down to this: 1 part grain to about 3 parts water. 3 days to ferment in warm weather, 4 in cold. And one line underneath it that just said, feed only what's gone sour, not what's gone bad. No footnote, no fine print. That's the whole thing she trusted her flock to for 40-some winters. And that $600 I mentioned at the start, that's roughly what the average small flock owner spends on store feed alone in a year, at today's prices, buying every bag whole and never once looking for another way. We spent a fraction of that, most years closer to a tenth, and the eggs never knew the difference. Same weight in your palm, same colour yolk, same everything. Just fewer trips to town to pay for it. I never did answer that other question I asked you at the beginning, about the last time you added up what you spend. I'm not going to. Some questions are more honest, left alone. The frost is probably still on that fence wire this morning, if I had to guess. And somewhere in Holmes County, a bucket just like mine is sitting by a door, doing the same work it always did, whether or not anyone's watching. Waste nothing you can still use. The people who raised me never wrote that down either, because they never thought anyone would need reminding.